Hi, you're listening to Face the Sun. My name is Gaia, and I'm your host. Welcome to a show where I discuss matters of religion, belief, and unbelief. For this week's episode, I will discuss part 2 of a play that was turned into a movie called The Laramie Project. So the Laramie Project was written and produced by the Teutonic Theater Project. Members of the theater company traveled back and forth to Laramie a number of times, and they stayed in the town and they would just talk with all the different residents about Matthew Shepard. They interviewed the residents about their perspective, about the gay community, and about Matthew Shepard's death. So on part 1, I kind of go over who Matthew Shepard was, but I just want to say here is that Matthew Shepard was a gay student at the University of Wyoming. He was beaten and left to die just outside of Laramie, Wyoming. And that was on October 6th of 1998. The next morning he was found and he was taken to the ER. And then the injuries were so bad that they had to get him to another hospital in Colorado where they could work on his very extensive injuries. Unfortunately, he succumbed to the injuries he sustained from being beaten and tortured. And in 6 days, he had died. So the story is about how this could have happened to a young student and what was really going on and what we can do to change. So the second half of this movie starts where they're gathering in someone's home. It's those in the LGBTQ community who are in Wyoming in that area, and also those who are in the theater project. And one of them says, her quote is that these gatherings, that this is a recent thing for us, and that it really only happened since Matthew, and that there was relief that they had finally connected, and that it was nice to see that there's a lot of us in Laramie. They asked the people in the theater company if they were out, which is so funny because they live in New York City, so it was easy for them to be out. And they're like, yeah, we're out. But the gay rancher in town, he said, I wasn't out before, actually. He said he thought that they all knew and that he wasn't going to tell anyone. And in the long run, he said, your self-esteem just becomes like crap. And he couldn't live like that anymore. Another person said that they just don't want to hide anymore. And another person said, I don't feel that free to be out. No one's asking. I'm not telling. The professor at the university, who was the first out professor at the university, she had said, I've always been out and I know how to take care of myself. But since the episode, I've been irrationally terrified. And what that means is we don't let our son walk out alone at night. And every time I see a pickup doing a U-turn, I think it's coming after me, and I'm shaking so badly, I have to stop what I'm doing. I just feel so badly, what they were going through in that community. And then someone said, I think it's because somewhere inside, we all know it could happen to us anytime. So in the movie, there's another part in this movie that really caught my attention that it just moves me so much whenever I see it. It's around the homecoming parade. And so there's a man who's being interviewed whose apartment has windows on opposite sides of his building, and he can see the homecoming parade route. He can see the beginning and the end. He just has to go from one side of his apartment to the other, and he can see the beginning and end of the parade route. He said that he couldn't join the parade because he had a cast on his leg because he'd broken it from a fall. And he's really disappointed because he heard that some students were going to walk for Matthew. He just said, I'm 52 years old and I'm gay. I've lived here for many years and I've seen a lot. And I was very moved when I saw the tag at the end of the homecoming parade. It was just a group of people walking behind a banner from Matthew Shepard. The parade went down to the end of the block and made a U-turn around the block and came around to the other side of my apartment. Maybe 10 minutes went by, he said. And then he said the most incredible thing happened. The parade came down the street, and the number of people marching for Matthew Shepard had grown, like 5 times. Can you imagine? The tag at the end was bigger than the entire parade. I thought to myself, thank God I got to see this in my lifetime. And my second thought was, thank you, Matthew. So I always cry whenever I see that part of the movie. You see these people watching the parade, and they just leave the sidewalk where they're watching, and they just become a part of the parade. And just to watch people just stopping, just watching the parade pass them by and then joining that end, to be so honoring towards Matthew and his family and towards the LGBT community. Just to watch it it's very, very moving. There's another interview by a woman that I'm not sure how much I really want to say about it. She says really mean things about Matthew and how her husband is a police officer and that another police officer was killed in the line of duty, and she didn't understand why they weren't getting as much media attention because an old man he shouldn't have been driving his car. He was too old, and then he killed somebody who was a police officer with his car. He just hit him. And somehow she felt like it wasn't fair that Matthew Shepard was getting media attention when he was tortured, beaten, and tied to a fence and left to die in the bitter cold. And he then, days later, died. That somehow she thought that was the same thing. And she called him a barfly, and she said he hit on people when there's no evidence of that. And she just said, well, that's what I'm hearing about him. So she just degraded his whole reputation as a human being. And I don't know. It was really disturbing. And you'd hear those kind of interviews, of people saying really disturbing things. But then you'd hear really great things like Father Roger Schmidt, who was this really cool priest who wasn't full of hate, to see somebody who runs a church or is head of his church and be kind. So let me see what he had said. Hold on. He said, Matthew Shepard has served us well. I cannot mention anyone who has done more for this community than Matthew Shepard. And I'm not going to sit here and say I was just this bold guy, no fear. I was scared. I was very vocal in this community when it happened. So I thought, should I call the bishop and ask him permission to do a vigil? And I was like, hell no. I'm not going to do that. His permission doesn't make it correct. And I'm not knocking bishops, but what is correct is correct. You think violence is what they did to Matthew? They did violence to Matthew. But can I make this personal? Every time you are called a fag or you are called a dyke, do you realize that is violence? That is the seed of violence. On the heels of that interview is Amanda from Tectonic Theater, who speaks on the phone, and in the movie she sees him on the road, but she calls his house and speaks with the wife and then speaks with the pastor. And at first he's cold, and she said that she went to his church service, and then his interest is piqued, and he says something that so many people hear from religious people. He says, now, as far as the victim, I know that lifestyle is legal, but I will tell you one thing. I hope Matthew Shepard, as he was tied to that fence, that he had time to reflect on a moment when someone had spoken the word of the Lord to him, and before he slipped into a coma, he had a chance to reflect on his lifestyle. And then he walked away. So, you just hear this kind of crazy thoughts. People would literally say this. I mean, they didn't even know to think that privately and just keep their mouth shut. They literally would say this out loud. So Amanda wept when she spoke with his pastor because she felt like that she let him speak to her that way and that she didn't say anything back. I think about how many times that we are horrified that we've been silent when somebody has said something about race or sex or identity, and we wish that we had said something. But I think that the regret is a good feeling, that I think that it's our regret is where we change. Because if we don't feel regret, how are we going to have the courage to say something the next time? And maybe sometimes we say something really harsh and full of rage when that was too much, or we just say a little bit and it's not enough. But I think it's the stirring of regret of being silent when we shouldn't always be silent is what is going to bring us to our next place of growth. The movie then turns to, it says on the screen, Monday, October 12th. And Rulon Stacy, he's the guy who, he's the head or like kind of CEO of the hospital in Colorado. And he walks out to the press and he says at 12 o'clock midnight on Monday, October 12th, Matthew Shepard's blood pressure began to drop. We immediately notified the family who were already at the hospital. At 12:43 a.m., Matthew Shepard died. His family was at his bedside. The family released the following statement. They again asked me to express their sincerest gratitude to the entire world for the overwhelming response of their son. The family is grateful that they did not have to make the decision regarding whether or not to continue life support for their son. Like a good son, he was caring to the end and removed guilt or stress from the family. He came into this world premature and he left the world premature. Matthew's mother said, right when he said that, he began to cry. Right when he started to say, Matthew's mother said. And when he was interviewed, he said, we'd been up for 72 hours straight. We'd gone home to sleep for half an hour and then get back up, come back in. And he said that while he was reading the statement, he thought of his own 4 daughters and that she doesn't have her kid anymore. So Matthew's mother said, go home and give your kids a hug and don't let a day go by without telling them that you love them. Rulon Stacy said that they started getting all these emails and letters saying, you cry like a baby on TV for all your patients or just the faggots? He said that after being thrown into this, he said, I guess I didn't understand the magnitude at which some people hate. And all the letters we got, there were some like that. Most were, thanks for your caring and compassion. And Matthew got caring and compassion from the moment he got here. Next, the movie turns to the funeral. And at the funeral, it was graciously snowing and raining on that day. So it really dampened the hate groups that came up to the funeral. So if you're listening to this and you know who Fred Phelps is, you can imagine what the funeral looked like. So Fred Phelps was this very hateful person and would have all kinds of signs up. And he's famous for his sign that says, God hates faggots. I remember when I would see that stuff, and I remember saying to a pastor, why don't you guys do something? Like, why don't you show up to where he is and just do something? Have posters of loving statements. Why don't you actively do something? Fred Phelps would be yelling, thou shalt not lie down with mankind as with womankind. It is an abomination. Matthew Shepard lived his life breaking that commandment. Now, if he repented in his dying hours, as we hope he did, if not, he was in hell along with those killers. It was such a bizarre thing to say. When the trial starts, Phelps is at it again. He's there at the trials. And there's a good friend of Shepard's named Romaine, and she was just so blown away that they would come to the funeral and do what they did. So she made angel costumes, and they were these huge big wings of angel costumes they made with PVC piping to keep the wings up high. And what they did was they came marching down the street and then stood in front of the protesters. The protesters, Marks Phelps, had to be in this fenced-in area. And so they stood in front of the fenced-in area and blocked them with their angel's wings. So if you Google it, Angel Action, Matthew Shepard, or Angels, Matthew Shepard, Fred Phelps, you'll see pictures of Matthew's best friend, Romaine, coming with a ton of people and blocking it. The press are taking pictures like mad, seeing that they were going to do something. You know, maybe the Christians weren't going to stop this hateful comments of someone saying hateful things about the God that they believe in. But she says this 21-year-old little lesbian is going to walk the line with him. So it was nice to see that. And that was a really moving part of the movie, too. So the movie turns to the first trial in which Russell Henderson, he sees one person after another who's being interviewed to be on the jury. And they're asked, do you have a problem with the death penalty? And could you sentence him to death? And every one of them said, no problem. Absolutely. So Russell Henderson knew his life was in danger himself, and he made a deal to tell everything that happened that night. And then he would have 2 life sentences consecutively. So back to back, he would not concurrently, but consecutively. So he'll die in prison. And then the next trial is with Aaron McKinney, and Aaron McKinney will not say that he's guilty of murder. He, in his interview right after, they were both caught right after the murder later on that night. I forget what happened, but they had done some altercation they were in, and they were picked up by the police, and all the evidence was all over their car. So when McKinney is asked soon after he's arrested, McKinney calls Matthew the queer, the fag, who asked for a ride home. And they said that in his truck, he put his hand on my leg and he said, I'm not a bleeping faggot. And if you touch me again, you're going to get it. And the detective said, well, what did he do then? Like, the threat is there. If you touch me again, you're going to get it. Well, what did he do? Well, he slid his hand on my leg, and I wasn't going to have that. So that was the reason for the murder. And the defense team argued that McKinney did what he did because Matthew made a pass at him. And a Laramie resident said, I just wanted to vomit, because that's like saying it's okay. It's like the Twinkie defense. Then when the guy killed Harvey Milk and Moscone, and that this was the gay panic defense. But the theater professor, though, she was quoted as saying, as much of a part of me that didn't want the defense saying it was gay bashing or gay panic, a part of me was really grateful, because I was really afraid that in this trial they were going to try and say it was robbery or it was about drugs. So when they used gay panic as the defense, I thought, this is good. Because if nothing else, the truth is going to come out and the truth is going to be told. In the tape recording of Aaron's confession, he said how many times he hit Matthew Shepard with his fist and with the pistol. He was conscious when Henderson tied him to the fence, and McKinney told Matthew to look away so he couldn't see the license plate on the truck. And then he told Matthew to tell him the license plate number, and Matthew recited the number on the truck, so he was beaten more. The movie ends with Matthew Shepard's dad, who is very much for the death penalty. He gives a statement that's beautiful and should really be listened to. I have all the words here in front of me, but it's just better to hear him say it. But in the end, he says, Mr. McKinney, I give you life in the memory of someone who no longer lives. May you have a long life, and may you thank Matthew every day for it. The movie ends with the lines from Angels in America, from the play put on by Wyoming University on October 13th, 1999. The dead will be commemorated and will struggle on with the living, and we are not going away. We won't die secret deaths anymore. The world only spins forward. We will be citizens. The time has come.